everything you need to fight the Trump administration. This is The Bill Press Show. Live at youtube.com/The Bill Press Show.
That's right. Everything you need on this Friday, February 8th, 2019. Good morning. I'm Igor Volsky, sitting in for Bill Press to review the week we had, from the State of the Union to the first hearing on gun control to the big introduction of the big new Green Deal. We got so much to talk about it, and we're gonna cover it all here this morning, get to all of the major stories, including the latest out of Virginia, a story that just keeps on getting worse by the moment. All of that, but first...
This is the Full Court Press.
Yes, indeed. Just come up with the stories making news on a Friday. Sad news. We'll start with the sad news this morning.
You're going to make me cry.
Well, it's a bummer, but look, we have to say farewell to former Congressman John Dingell, who passed away last night at the age of 92. Best known for being the longest-serving member of Congress ever.
54 years, 21 days.
Look at you. Yes, absolutely. In fact, it was back in 2013 that he passed that milestone. Remember this guy? John Boehner.
Ladies and gentlemen, you'll raise your glass to a true man of the house, John Dingell. Hear, hear.
A great voice, that John Boehner.
Yeah, the old John Boehner. That was his tribute to him. That was after Dingell passed the record for the longest-serving member of Congress in 2013. His wife, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, put out a statement yesterday, and lots of condolences pouring in from Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, all the heavy hitters paying tribute to
John Dingell had a long career. One of the things he did was exempt firearm manufacturers from public safety review, so the products they produce are not reviewed for public safety. His wife now has legislation to close that loophole.
Oh, no kidding. How interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Valentine's Day is coming up. Do you celebrate Valentine's Day?
I do celebrate Valentine's Day. I have not yet gotten my Valentine's Day gift.
I don't know if being a Valentine's Day Grinch is a thing, but I don't celebrate Valentine's Day. I think it's...
So I'm not getting anything from you this
I'm not
year.
going to get you anything
okay.
for Valentine's
That's
Day.
good to know, and yet I came in bright and early.
Yes. Well, here's the thing about Valentine's Day. A new study says that there's a smaller percentage of Americans that are actually celebrating the holiday. More and more people say, we have enough holidays, and this is really one that's made up. They don't feel like doing it. But there is some good news if you do celebrate. Americans are expected to spend a record amount on Valentine's Day this year. So there are fewer people participating,
but the
people that
more.
are participating are spending more money. So if you have a significant other, you're expecting something from them, you should expect something bigger than last year.
Well, this year I would encourage also folks to give to survivors. It's, of course, the year anniversary of the Parkland shooting. And I'm sure there are funds set up to still help with the struggle that's going on after that, because those effects after mass shooting last 4 years.
Total spending in the United States on Valentine's Day will likely hit $20.7 million. The average person, this is going to be a test, Igor. How much do you think is the appropriate amount to spend on a significant other for Valentine's Day?
This is for a Valentine's Day gift.
Valentine's Day gift or gifts.
I mean, I think maybe $40 to $50.
The average that Americans are going to spend on a Valentine's Day gift, $161.96. That's too much.
That is a lot.
That's a lot of money, right?
That's a lot.
The last year's percentage was 143, so it's up 13%.
Why is that?
I have no idea.
Well,
I have no idea.
People want to make their loved ones feel special. I'm for that.
So you're going to go out and spend $161 for Valentine's Day this year?
162. I always want to be above average, Peter.
There you go. Why not just round it up to 200?
All right, fine.
Yeah, go nuts. Have a ball. Look, you're going to buy a lot of chocolate candy for $161.
I love that dark chocolate. I love it.
You're going to have to buy a lot of it.
It's going to be delicious.
This is the Bill Press Show.
That's right, the Bill Press Show this Friday, February 8th, 2019. I'm Igor Wolski, filling in for Bill Press to review the full week we had from the State of the Union to the first gun control hearings in the House in 8 years. Hard to believe, 8 years the House went without talking about the crisis engulfing our country of 40,000 Americans dying every year from guns. And by the way, as you can imagine, I work in the gun control space. I watched those hearings. I tweeted those hearings. So I'll have a lot to say. But let me start first with the ever-evolving, ever-depressing, and horrifying story from Virginia. Just to bring folks up to speed, you all remember at the end of last week, I believe it was last Friday, that news broke that Ralph Northam, the governor of Virginia, had on his medical school yearbook a picture of a man in blackface and a man in a KKK hood.
Think about this for a second. It was
a week ago.
Less than a week ago. It was Friday late afternoon that this story broke. So when we did our show a week ago, Ralph Northam was still, a perfectly fine, acceptable governor of Virginia.
Progressive governor of Virginia.
A week. It's been less than a week. That was such a week.
So the pictures come out, I think, from a local Virginia newspaper. Ralph Northam issues a statement apologizing for those photos, but not clarifying which of the characters he was portraying, shall we say, in that photo. And then the following day, just as leaders across the state and across the country condemned Northam's photo and called on him to resign, the governor issued a statement that he, in fact, was not pictured in those pictures and held a press conference saying that, he's going to stay in office despite the fact that his approval rating in the state dropped by 40 percentage points, and every single Democrat, including almost all of the 2020 candidates, called on Northam to resign. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, early this week, we learned that Justin Fairfax, the lieutenant governor of Virginia, the man who would take over for Northam should he eventually step down, is facing charges of sexual harassment from a colleague back in 2004 at the Democratic National Convention. She claims that he forced her to perform sexual acts that she did not consent to.
Let me just be clear. These are charges of sexual assault.
Sexual assault. Yeah. Yes, thank you. He denied the charges. There's now more detail coming out of the accuser, who wrote a letter detailing the allegations in some detail. She claimed that at the 2004 Democratic Convention, Justin Fairfax asked her to come up to his room, that they made out, and then he performed actions that she did not consent to. So, Democrats are now responding to this. Initially, they, I think, gave Fairfax some time to explain exactly what was going on, and he was making the rounds, certainly in Virginia, shoring up his support there. A report also came out earlier this week that he referred to the accuser in a derogatory term during a private meeting. That was then leaked. And so here's Kamala Harris yesterday responding to the letter that has since surfaced that the accuser has written detailing her allegations against Justin Fairfax. Kamala Harris says that the allegations, that they seem credible.
The letter written by the woman reads as a credible account.
And she calls for an investigation to get to the bottom of what happened.
Certainly her letter reads as it's quite detailed, and suggests that there's credibility there, but there needs to be an investigation to determine what exactly happened.
Now, that appears to be the Democratic line. Let's have an investigation. Republicans in the state have, of course, called on Fairfax to resign. Now, if Fairfax was to step down as the lieutenant governor, Mark Herring, the attorney general of Virginia, who just won, well, last year, won a second term and was seen by many to be a candidate who could mount a credible run for the governor's office in Virginia. As all of this was going on, as Ralph Northam was denying that he was in the photos that he had previously acknowledged to be a part of, as Justin Fairfax denied allegations that he engaged in sexual abuse, Mark Herring, the Attorney General of Virginia, admits that he too wore blackface while in college. He and his friend did so, it looks like, for Halloween, Peter, and Mark Herring issuing a apology for doing so, but saying if he cannot repair the damage that he had caused, that he, in fact, would resign. Now, if Mark Herring was to also go, the line of succession then goes to the House of Delegates, where the Republican speaker there, the leader of that House in Virginia, would become the new governor of that state. And Democrats, of course, are very worried about what this means for 2020 and what it means for the census if Republicans take control of the State House. Whew.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a whole lot.
No, and I'm not even including here that revelations also came out that Bobby Scott, the congressman from Virginia, was told of these allegations about Justin Fairfax a year ago, that the accuser told Scott of what happened, that the Washington Post was investigating what happened, could not collaborate the claims, did not run the story, and of course, it's coming out. Now, where does this leave us, really, as we grapple with the fact that leaders who we thought had progressive values, right, who were determined or at least politically told us that they were going to represent all Americans and that they were certainly going to put forward policies that were going to help minority communities, that we find out that 20, 30, however many years ago, they engaged in a disgusting racist display that is meant to, caricature African Americans. And we're just finding out about it now.
Yeah, the story is very troubling, and I've seen a lot of people on Twitter sort of mocking the South for all of this, and the South certainly has a lot of problems when it comes to race. But this blackface phenomenon that we've seen, it took place everywhere. And I read a really interesting story yesterday about why the late night comics are having a really hard time talking about this.
Jimmy Fallon himself.
Jimmy Fallon in the 90s wore blackface. I watched the video yesterday of him impersonating Chris Rock.
This was on the Man
His good
Show.
friend. No, this is different. This was on Saturday Night Live. This is Jimmy Fallon. This is Jimmy
Fallon. Who am I thinking about?
You're thinking about Jimmy Kimmel. I'm getting to Jimmy Kimmel. So Jimmy Fallon, as a way of sort of spoofing his friend, Chris Rock, and Chris Rock went on the record and said he thought it was fine and funny and all of that. But still, he put on blackface and affected an accent like he was Chris Rock to do a bit on SNL. Jimmy Kimmel, also, when he was on the Man Show, did an impression of basketball player Karl Malone. And he went full blackface and stood there in a basketball uniform doing Karl Malone. He also did Oprah Winfrey with blackface on.
Oh.
And so this is something that I don't want to say was acceptable, but people just didn't care about in the 80s and 90s on a scale that you could get in trouble for, you know?
Well,
Not that that makes it okay. I'm just saying it would people didn't get in trouble for it when they did it.
You know, I just wish that Megyn Kelly was here to really cover and dive into all of these stories. I mean, part of the problem with her comments and for what we're seeing now, and I think part of the reason why we're so disgusted is obviously the very racist nature of blackface, the racist history of blackface, the fact that it came about in the late 1800s, I believe, as a way to caricature African Americans and portray them as kind of dumb folks who were happy to be slaves. That's the origin of blackface, and we saw it all the way through the 1950s, that it was regularly used in movies and on television. And
we were having a conversation yesterday. Cyprian and I were talking about back in the 90s on Comedy Central. They always had this movie playing on the weekends. It's called Soul Man, starring C. Thomas Howell. Are you familiar with this?
I'm not, but I think I read about it in an article, a larger article about the problems with blackface.
C. Thomas Howell is a white actor. And he, the whole premise of the movie is that he dyes his skin black so that he can get a scholarship to college.
So they can benefit from all that sweet affirmative action.
Exactly.
I see.
Exactly. And the story, the movie is incredibly messed up in hindsight. But it was on TV all the time. All the time.
Well, can we say that the way we're collectively reacting to these stories, right? The fact that you had Ralph Northam experience a 40% drop in his approval ratings, I'm sure.
Is that bad? A 40% drop?
That seems like
good?
a big. That seems like a roller coaster.
Yeah, that feels
drop.
like a lot.
That the public conversation is one of disgust. That you have, really both political parties now calling for him to step down. Does it show some level of evolution, right, in the right direction, that we as a society are now reading and looking at these photos through a more just lens and through more just eyes than we had been in the 1990s when Comedy Central would play that movie, No Questions Asked, when Jimmy Kimmel and Jimmy Fallon would put on blackface and we would watch, right? And we would applaud, and those comedians would go on to have even larger careers and even bigger platforms.
Yeah.
If that happened today, if you had an up-and-coming comedian today do what Jimmy Kimmel or Jimmy Fallon did, I don't think they'd end up on the Tonight Show, 5-10 years down the road.
No,
that's a good thing,
I
right?
think that's a good point. And I was also reminded of the movie Tropic Thunder in 2008.
Yes.
2008, and one of the
Robert Downey Jr.
Downey Jr. is in blackface for the entire movie, and he's playing a character who's doing blackface. Not that makes it any better, but that was 10 years ago. That was 10 years ago.
And you remember the conversation that we had about it 10 years ago was fairly muted, right?
Oh, absolutely.
There were some eyebrows raised. But there wasn't any kind of great outcry.
Yeah.
I don't think in 2019 Robert Downey Jr. would take that kind of role.
Oh, absolutely not.
By the way, has anyone heard from him? Is he still working?
Yeah, he's one of the biggest actors in Hollywood, Igor.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, have you heard of Iron Man?
Oh, is he in
the
that?
Avengers and all
Oh,
that?
yeah, I've heard of all those things. I haven't seen any of those movies. So.
That's right. I'm just saying he's just a big actor. Oh. But I mean, look, blackface is unacceptable and bad, and anybody who did it should have to answer for it, period.
Yes.
The thing that's
no, not to answer for it. I think here's what I think. I think if you are Jimmy Fallon or Jimmy Kimmel and you did blackface, you need to address it and explain to your audience who you used to amuse with this kind of entertainment why it's wrong, right? You have a responsibility as someone who did this to show how you've learned why that's wrong.
Yeah.
And use this as an educational moment, because the problem is part of the reason why the Jimmies did this is because we as a society don't have these conversations often enough. We don't have it in our schools. We don't have it in our public square. And so this isn't to excuse any of it. It's just to say that we have to use this as an opportunity to not just, rightfully shame Ralph Northam for what he did and call on him to resign, but to also begin having a conversation about why such representations are wrong, and why, and what we have to learn from them.
I also think that the particularly damaging piece about this for Ralph Northam, when you compare it to Herring, not to say that what Herring did was good and okay and acceptable, but the Ralph Northam stuff, it's someone in blackface standing next to someone in a full Klan outfit.
I mean, that is just unbelievable.
That,
in 1984, before I was born, but a time when to me, and clearly to Virginians and to Americans across the country, for those people to come up into a party or whatever that was, A, dress that way, B, for that picture to be taken, C, for that picture to end up in a yearbook is, and D, the fact that Ed Gillespie, who ran against Northam in the election last year, that whoever he employed on his campaign could not find this photo? I mean, my goodness. That person, whoever his director of opposition research, should clearly never work again.
When you
just as a side note.
That being said, when you look at the racist campaign that Ed Gillespie ran, he might have seen that
Ed
and
Gillespie
thought it could have helped at Ralph Northam.
Oh, goodness. Ed Gillespie ran one of the most racist campaigns we've seen in recent years. So, and the fact that he didn't win, I think is a relief for all of us, not only because, he's not the governor of Virginia, but also because his racist campaign would have created a template for the midterms, which were already filled with all kinds of racial fears, and didn't need Ed Gillespie anyway. Obviously the news won't stop breaking on the situation in Virginia, but man, again, hard to believe. Only a week, and you've had like thunderous events going on in the state. And, on Fairfax, we'll see if there's going to be an investigation. I haven't seen anything that says they're moving towards that end, but certainly, given the new details in this letter, given the how detailed they are, it feels like, this is something that really needs to be looked at, and Justin Fairfax really needs to address. Now, the other thing that happened this week is you had 3 hearings in the House. One on gun control, as we mentioned. The second on climate change. And then the third, the House Ways and Means Committee, which is one of the most powerful committees in the House, began to think about subpoenaing. How do you say that word? Subpoenaing Trump's tax return. It's not somebody's name. It's just a word that I mess up. Getting Trump's tax returns and analyzing those returns by passing, what are they? Is it a regulation or legislation? I suppose that would compel people who are running for high public office to release their tax returns. Naturally, Republicans claimed that this was a witch hunt, and that Democrats were looking to, as Jackie Walorski, a Republican member of the House from Indiana, claimed, Democrats are trying to weaponize tax law against their political opponents.
This is all about weaponizing our tax laws to target a political foe.
Yeah, see, I told you she should say that, and she
She
did.
She said exactly that.
And she did. But Democrats arguing that President Trump broke with years of tradition by failing to release his returns, then had a cascade of different reasons why he wouldn't release them. They argue that sunlight on the president's returns, on those seeking higher office, is oh so critical to ensure that A, that candidate has paid their taxes, that B, they're not profiting off of the policies that they put forward, and that C, there's not any kind of entanglement in your taxes that could jeopardize your ability to serve or could influence your decisions in office, and to ultimately ensure that the decisions you make in office are guided by what you perceive to be in the best interest of the country versus what is in your own personal best interest. And certainly with this president, a president who refused to recuse himself, untangle himself from his business, whose children both advise him and run his business, and whose inaugural committee has now come under investigation for possibly using those funds in the committee to enrich the Trump company, I should say, and Trump family members. Given all of that, and given the fact that you have dignitaries all around the world who have business before the United States, that they're staying in Trump hotels, that they're paying north of $2,000 a night to stay in Trump hotels, that, of course, directly enrich the Trump organization. Given that all of this is happening, and given that this president is going to great lengths to hide his tax returns, which, of course, begs the question, what do you have to hide? Why are you not releasing them? Who do you owe debts to? Who has leverage over you? Those are, frankly, questions that need to be answered. And those are answers the American people deserve.
You know, I think a lot of people saw what happened during the election and gave a sort of collective shrug about Donald Trump's tax returns because they didn't understand the issue, or they didn't realize what could possibly be in those tax returns, or, he says he's rich, but he's not as rich as he says he is. Well, we've known that for a long time, or, whatever reason. But Noah Bookbinder, who's the head of Crew, actually had a great comment about this yesterday and said,
we could learn other things about his finances that we haven't even thought to ask yet.
That's the thing. Like, we have no idea. And this is a guy who ran a unscrupulous business, and who knows what's in those tax returns? Like, who knows? Who knows?
I gotta say, this inauguration stuff, all of the stuff that's coming out of the Southern District of New York, all of the information that was seized during the raid of Michael Cohen's office, that is now spurring some of these other investigations, including that deep dive into the money that was flowing into the inaugural committee. This feels, Peter, like just the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
Just the beginning of investigations that are going to haunt the Trump organization way after this president is out of office, that is going to haunt his children for years and years and years to come. Because these guys came into office and tried to undo, just decades of precedent and regulation and oversight, and tried to get around the law in order to enrich themselves. And now we know, by the way, from the Michael Cohen tapes, that the woman who was running the inauguration and helped plan the 18 parties that were happening there, that she complained to Michael Cohen in phone calls that he for some reason recorded and that investigators now have, complaining of the way the Trump organization and the Trump adult children were meddling in what was going on. And were possibly doing so in an effort to profit from the inauguration. That's how this administration started.
There's no grift too
before
small.
day one. Right,
Yeah.
exactly. The approach was, we are using the presidency, we are using our democratic system to enrich ourselves. And we have laws in this country against that. And what we've seen in the last couple of days, and certainly in the last months and even years, the slow drip, 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 drip of accountability slowly making its way down. And certainly now with the Democratic-controlled House, there are even fewer places to run for the Trump family, for Trump associates, for people like Michael Cohen. By the way, what is going on with the Michael Cohen investigation? He was supposed to testify, next week to Congress. That's now been moved to February 28th. He has to report to jail, next month? He has such a small window. All of these committees want to talk to him.
He's got a busy February.
He's going to be a busy man.
Testifying, prison time,
There's a lot for us to find out. And you know what? These hearings, and I think the 28th might be a closed-door hearing. I'm not sure. Is it?
It is.
But I think, just the public service of having a public hearing for the American people to really understand what's happening plays such an important educational role in putting all of the pieces together and clearly telling the American people what this government, what this administration has been up to. All right, quick break for me. We're going to talk budget next. And can Congress avert another shutdown just days away as lawmakers in Capitol Hill try to reach a big deal that the president would support? I'm Igor Volsky. You're listening to The Bill Press Show. We'll be right back.
This is The Bill Press Show.
There was an old woman who lived in a shoe. She had so many children. She didn't know what to do.
Did you have a good day at school?
She gave them some broth. Without any bread.
There you go.
And kissed them all soundly.
Night-night. Good night.
And put them to bed. Hunger is a story we can end. End it at feedingamerica.org.
Awkward. Do I look familiar? I should. You might remember me from here. Here. Or maybe even here.
But an awkward silence can be a great thing.
It can actually be a perfect moment to reach out to a friend and ask if they're okay if they seem down.
It doesn't matter how you say it.
You all right?
Everything's okay?
All G?
You all right, girl? You cool?
You bugging dog.
Just show you're there for them.
Go on, Kelly. Susie Awkward.
Hey, you haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
Do you want to retire like a champ?
Just like legendary basketball star Uncle Drew.
Don't do it like that, Uncle Drew.
You're already acing the game. You've got your dream ride.
Don't be slamming my door.
Sorry about that.
You just did the same.
Gotta get the boys. Your dream vacation and your dream team. And now you can make your retirement just as legendary.
I get buckets.
Get the tips you need to get on track at aceyourretirement.org.
It's a big responsibility.
Oh, it's huge. I know, it's huge.
And the salary.
Oh my god, yes.
Right?
I mean, like, I was about to move in with my parents, and right before, so this saved me.
I really believe in you, you know?
Thank you. It's nice to hear that from someone.
These are cool. Did you, what did you...
By the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Follow us on Twitter at BP Show. This is The Bill Press Show.
That's right. Tweet us at BP Show, at BP Show. We want to hear from you. And hey, you tweet a good comment, we might read it on air. By the way, I'm at Igor Volsky on Twitter. That's because I am Igor Volsky. I'm filling in for Bill Press on this Friday, February 8th, 2019. Now, the problem is I am trying in my head to do 15 minus 8, which I think is 7, right? Did I do that right? 7. Nailed it. 7 days away from a potential government shutdown as a special committee of 17 lawmakers works on a compromise to keep the government open and to figure out what to do with the president's $5.7 billion request in supplemental funding for a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. For an update on where the negotiations stand, we're joined by Caitlin Emma. She is the Budget and Appropriations reporter for Politico on Twitter at Caitlin Z. Emma. Somebody take Caitlin Emma, rude. Or online at Politico.com. See, at Igor Volsky, I don't have that problem. Cool. Nobody wanted it. You know, actually, it was funny. I was just doing something and I realized that I don't own igorvolsky.com. So I went on, I bought igorvolsky.com, igorvolsky.org. Nobody wanted it. It was available, practically free. They're practically giving it away to me.
Sometimes it's just nice to feel wanted.
Thank you. Yeah, well, exactly. But that's the nice thing. You know, there's very few nice things about being a Russian person in America these days.
Yeah.
That is one of them, is that nobody wants your domain names.
Okay.
So between that and the Russian hat I wear when it's cold out, it's really the only way I can lean in and be Russian these days.
Okay.
Just Caitlin, in case you're wondering.
Okay.
Now you know.
Gotcha.
Anyway, moving on.
Great.
Moving on to the real stories. So 17 lawmakers trying to find a large deal that would satisfy the border wall question, the border security question, as well as get appropriations for a bunch of different agencies, those that were closed during the shutdown. How has that been going? Because I remember, was it last week, the president said they were wasting their time, but now it looks like they may be close to a deal.
Right. Lots of mixed messages from the White House. And as you probably remember, a few weeks ago, the president agreed to sign a short-term spending fix so that these 17 lawmakers could get to work on fulfilling his border security request. So the government shut down for 5 weeks because he was demanding $5.7 billion for a border wall. He is still unlikely to get that, and we're still not sure what he's going to do when these lawmakers unveil a deal, which is likely going to be this weekend, Monday. They're under a very tight deadline. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has said she wants to follow this sort of procedural 72-hour rule.
Give everyone a chance to read the bill.
Give everyone,
see what's in it.
So this is a new thing that House Democrats are, say that they are going to stick to. So,
by the way, if I remember correctly, I believe when John Boehner took over in 2011, that he had a similar rule. Paul Ryan had a similar rule. All those rules in the early days of those Congresses were followed and then were later just kind of pushed aside. So this is a familiar thing. This idea of let folks read the legislation makes a lot of sense. But in the reality of getting things done on deadlines, that often falls by the wayside. But anyway.
When Congress wants to pass something, they can do it very quickly, like they did a few weeks ago. I mean, we woke up that Friday morning. The government was still shut down. Hundreds of thousands of workers had missed 2 paychecks. And all of a sudden, flights at LaGuardia were starting to get grounded, and everybody.
That's when things.
And
got
there
a
was
little
like
shaky.
a shift. Yeah, there's this sort of tonal shift. Like, this is a problem. Like, it's a problem to have hundreds of thousands of workers go without pay. 2 paychecks. But that was the day that Congress, lickety split, passed a short-term spending fix. The president signed it. So anyway, we're looking at a border security deal to sort of fulfill this request by the president. It's likely going to include money for technology. It's likely going to include money for fencing of some kind. But it seems like Democrats and Republicans, are where they fall on the numbers is really where it's going to be interesting. Like I said, Trump is unlikely to get anywhere close to his $5 billion demand for an actual, physical wall. So how much money they provide for fencing, how many miles of fencing, how many detention beds is included in this package. Like, that's a big sticking point for Democrats. So where they fall on some of those numbers will be really interesting to see. And as part of this broader, package, they have to keep a quarter of the government open. So we have to pass, 6 massive spending bills that were already agreed upon last year. So that's not super controversial. And a certain amount of disaster aid for, communities in California that were ravaged by wildfires, and hurricane relief, and, relief for Puerto Rico. Democrats are looking at that. Whether or not Republicans allowed that to be included in this is something to watch. But what Trump is going to do, nobody really knows. It's sort of, he hasn't given any sort of hard public commitment. The chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, Richard Shelby, briefed him yesterday on sort of the parameters of
and was very optimistic.
And
when
he
left
came
the White
out of
House.
it and he was like beaming. He's like all excited. He's like, I think this is the best I've felt, since last year. He's got a big smile on his face. So that's all we're really working with right now in terms of whether or not the president will sign this.
Nobody knows where the details are. I mean, I've seen reports of members saying we're 99% there, we're 99.8% there. Again, as you point out, they don't know where the president's going to be on this. But in terms of the border security provisions, I remember was it in late December when Democrats made an offer of some $3 billion, is that right, or $2 billion for border security that included the technology, maybe some fencing, the drone stuff, this idea that you don't need to build a wall, that you can use technology in certain areas around the border where it would be effective. Do you have a sense of what Democrats offered before the shutdown, how much that's going to be reflected in this negotiation? Because both parties at least have common ground that, yes, we need to do more on border security. The question is it an actual physical barrier or is it something different?
So that's a huge question. The spending bill that lawmakers put together last year for the Department of Homeland Security included $1.3 billion in border security. So where this new deal comes out and how much different it looks from that is something that we're going to be looking at really closely in terms of the deal. But like I said, on, I believe it was Wednesday, these 17 lawmakers who are part of this committee, charged with crafting a deal, they were briefed by Border Patrol officials in this sort of very secure room in the Capitol building, and there were all these reporters staking it out, waiting for anybody to come out,
Tell me something.
Yeah, what did you learn? Like, how much fencing do you need? Anything. Just please tell us something. And it seemed like Democrats and Republicans were still pretty far apart on, we need more technology, we need smarter tech, the idea of a wall is antiquated versus no, barriers need to be part of this. So what is prioritized in the final deal will be really interesting. I think, some folks are saying there will be a significant amount of Democrats who won't be able to accept this because it will include money for fencing or some kind of
And Pelosi
barrier.
said early on it's not going to have border wall money.
She has said no border wall money. I mean, she has shown an openness to a specific kind of fencing. So I think a lot of folks think that, Democrats are, perhaps need to accept the fact that there will be some money for that, but a significant money for, amount of money for technology and smarter ways of stopping illegal activity at the border.
And let's talk about the politics of all of this, because post-shutdown, it feels like the president is really boxed in. You have Democrats who are saying, as we mentioned, no wall money, but yes to border security in other ways. And then you have Republicans saying, we don't want another shutdown. We don't want you to declare a national emergency. So he's really boxed in. And it feels like, even though earlier, was it last week, as I mentioned, that he said, this committee is a waste of time, I'm just going to do national declaration, that here we are on this Friday with the president possibly being in a position where he's going to have to accept whatever Congress comes up with. And that's really unfamiliar territory for him.
It is. And, you mentioned earlier that for the past couple of weeks, he's been saying and tweeting, this is a waste of time. Everybody's wasting their time. I have this national emergency declaration in my back pocket, et cetera, et cetera. Some of my colleagues are now reporting that they are looking at, sort of a less drastic form of executive action that would allow them to free up some money. But yeah, he really doesn't have any other options. Republicans hate the idea of a national emergency declaration because it opens sort of a can of worms where, you sort of have this unlimited executive authority to, declare whatever you want a disaster and use money for it. And, people have made the argument.
It's a real big precedent that sets.
Right. People have made the argument that, the next Democratic president will come in and, declare a healthcare emergency. And then now we have to do Medicare for all. So there's this argument on the right that this is not a good idea. Any sort of form of executive authority is not a good idea. And Senator Mitch McConnell, who, really dictates what comes to the Senate floor, has said, I don't want to do another short-term spending fix. We don't
want to kick it down the road.
No, we have a lot to do. The specter of shutdown, continuing to loom over all of that impedes all of that work. So where does that, leave the president? It's sort of unclear. He might just have to stomach this, and I don't know, maybe some sort of executive action will happen.
Well, apparently, Caitlin, there may be a third way, because as you guys report, mega all-stars visit border to plot private wall project. What is that about?
So there is, it's a very improbable quest, but there is a group of...
nice way of putting it.
It's an improbable quest of, a group of hardline conservative Trump supporters like Eric Prince, Sheriff, what's his name, Dave Clark, those folks who are trying to build the wall with private money. And I believe they had some sort of and I don't know a ton about this. I think they had some sort of GoFundMe or Kickstarter or something online that, kicked this whole effort off. But so they're down there. I don't know. They took a field trip. They're scoping it out. I don't know what comes of that. They might be able to I think they recognize they can't raise billions, but they could
Well,
raise.
there's a GoFundMe, right?
They could raise millions,
yeah,
and build some wall.
Oy vey. Well, this fight that we're certainly gonna, well, it's either going to be a fight after the 15th or it's not, right? Depending on what the president does. We don't know what the president's going to do. But it's going to be the first of many in this new Congress as they tackle future fiscal issues, the debt ceiling, budget caps to avert a sequester. It feels like we're going to see a version of this movie over and over and over again.
Right. Well, there are a number of big fiscal fights ahead this year, very important ones. Not only are we still looking backward into 2019, finishing those spending bills, we have to start work on next year's spending bills. And that starts with the president's budget request, which the 5-week shutdown has delayed by more than a month. The Office of Management and Budget told us they expect, or they're, quote unquote, tracking to release it mid-March. That could be optimistic. That could bleed into April. I'm not sure, but that whole process kicks off with that request. And I believe the goal among some in Congress is to get those spending bills done by June, which is extremely ambitious. In addition to that, we have to come to a deal on raising the budget caps, or about $126 billion in automatic cuts will hit defense and non-defense spending.
This is from that grand bargain
right.
during the Obama
That would
era.
be extremely painful. Nobody wants that. Republicans don't want that to hit defense. Democrats don't want that to hit non-defense spending. And, for a while, there was some talk of maybe we should toss in the budget caps or something like that in this deal to avoid a second shutdown, which we have a week left to go. And, that was sort of roundly dismissed as that's super duper ambitious. This is a very big, discussion that needs to happen. To toss that in could potentially be poisonous or make things unnecessarily difficult. So that's another thing.
And it also, I'll just mention, because all of these fights are so critical, right, and moving these pieces of legislation is so critical, they also provide leverage points for the administration, maybe for Democrats in the House, to move agenda pieces that they see as crucial, right? There's a practice in Washington, both parties do it, it's been going on for ages, where you take a priority that you can't move on your own as a standalone measure, and you attach it to a piece of what's called must-pass legislation, and that's how you get things through. So, for instance, during the Obama era, that's how Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed in 2009, December of 2009, December 2010, JK, it was 10. And so, who knows what kind of brinksmanship, what kind of theater we're going to see, what this president is going to do. I mean, he shut the government down to try to get the wall. So that's kind of part of the equation here as we think about what do these fiscal fights look like? What else is going to be a part of them?
Right. And I think, Republicans and Democrats realize that this is not a normal White House. And
they've caught on.
Well,
not normal.
I mean, in normal circumstances, for example, in addition to the budget caps, another thing that we have to do in the coming months is raise the debt ceiling, or the country goes into default, which would be catastrophic, right? And you would think that everybody roundly agrees that, we must raise the debt ceiling, right? And it should be a process that is easy enough to get done. But this is not a normal White House. And the folks surrounding the president, I don't know that there's a ton of confidence in some of those folks to brief him on these issues. And I think, with the 35-day shutdown, that has sort of shaken some lawmakers into thinking, well, we're going to do everything we can to get this done. But will he ultimately support it? Or, you said, will he try and tack something else onto it or something like that? So there are major fiscal fights ahead. And, the shutdown has delayed early negotiations on some of this stuff. and sort of the I guess the partisan sort of like pall that hung over that 5-week period doesn't like bode well for a lot of these things.
No, I mean, part of this is there's like a lot of what's done on Capitol Hill. It comes as a result of relationships that lawmakers have with each other and how they work together and what kind of rapport they have, how willing they are to come together. And you're absolutely right. After you have the grueling fight of the shutdown, which clearly divided everybody along partisan lines, how can those two sides, after 35 days of screaming at each other, now come together and make anything work smoothly?
Right. Well, I think, both Republicans and Democrats with these high stakes fiscal fights know that they have to get done. And I mean, you would hope that the president at some point realizes that too. I mean, he did sign a short-term funding fix to reopen the government. I think at some point,
when he had no choice,
right? And I think at some point, I mean, it was truly, just an untenable situation. You just couldn't win. So I think the country going into default would be a similar situation that just has to be avoided.
Yeah, that would not be a good thing. The country going into default, although having a shutdown, also not a good thing.
Right.
We had the longest one in history. Is there any sense, by the way, or have any estimates come out? Because I remember during previous shutdowns, and maybe this just takes a little longer, a accounting of the cost, the enormous cost to the economy of shutting down the government and what that means for growth. The president during the State of the Union touted the incredible economy and the miracle economy that he's presiding over. The jobs report didn't seem to really reflect all at least the consequences of the shutdown. The latest job report, the latest numbers. So, is there a sense yet of do we pay a price as an economy for that 35-day shutdown?
Well, the Congressional Budget Office did release a report on the cost of the shutdown, sort of along with their annual, every year, every January, they release sort of a 10-year economic outlook. And they released alongside that a report detailing the cost of the shutdown. And they found that in total, it cost the economy, I believe, about $11 billion. But based on what we, anticipate making up for that in growth, the total cost in foregone economic activity was about $3 billion. So,
wow.
A lot of Democrats obviously seized on that and were like, look how awful, you know what I mean? Like, this is terrible. And, this was a massive, came at a massive price, et cetera, et cetera.
And Republicans questioned the numbers, right?
Well, Republicans didn't question the numbers. They just noted what is true. It's not economically that significant. It's a small number. It
depends on your context.
Right. It's an itty bitty fraction of, the overall GDP. But what the CBO, the director of the CBO, who is one of the leading economists, said in releasing this report was, $3 billion is not that significant, but the cost to individual federal workers, was great,
those stories still are so heartbreaking.
Right, and contractors, so you cannot write that off. And they, were very clear in saying that some of that personal cost, that's very difficult to quantify.
Yeah.
So
Caitlin Emma, she's the budget and appropriations reporter for Politico on Twitter at CaitlinZEmma. Caitlin, thank you so much. I'm Igor Volsky, filling in for Bill Press. Quick break, and we're back. Stay with us.
This is the Bill Press Show. everything you need to fight the Trump administration. This is The Bill Press Show. Live at youtube.com/The Bill Press Show.
That's right, The Bill Press Show on this Friday, February 8th, 2019. I'm Igor Volsky, filling in for Bill Press. As we get into all of the news of the week, and my goodness, we have just had congressional hearings from bookend to bookend. We've had a State of the Union address. We have so much to get into, including all of the latest developments around the Mueller investigation. Of course, the hearing with Matthew Whitaker, the acting Attorney General, kicks off in the Judiciary Committee in just about an hour and a half. We'll see how that goes. That might be just a little theatrical. We'll get into all of that next, but first...
This is the Full Court Press.
Alrighty, just a couple of other stories making news. So it feels like I do a story like this every couple of months, but there is another state that is taking a look at charging people to look at pornographic websites.
Oh.
This time it is Hawaii. There is a bill that is being brought up that is proposing that if you're using the internet to look at porn, you pay $20 fee, and that unlocks pornographic websites for you to look at. Now, of course...
Love a good revenue raiser. Yes.
As we know, the internet is really for porn. Studies have shown that porn sites get better traffic than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined. So there is some legislation moving through the House and Senate in Hawaii. People over the age of 18 pay a one-time fee of $20, and that would unlock pornographic websites for you to look.
My goodness. And what is the rationale that this is a revenue rate? Like, why are people... Why?
Well, it's the rationale actually isn't as crazy as others have been. Others were for, like, purely religious reasons. They think it's bad and they want to tax the evil. But Hawaii, they said, look, they got a real problem because it's really hard to keep kids from going onto these pornographic websites, right? Kids are using the internet all the time now, so how do you keep them off of these websites? It's really hard. Well, pardon the pun. But it's very hard to keep the kids off the websites, so they're saying, like, look, $20, you have to have a credit card, you have to, like, figure this out, and that way, like, you will get some of the kids off of the website. Well, I'm not saying it's a good or bad idea.
Peter's clearly lobbying for this.
No!
On his way to Hawaii as we speak. Please don't.
So, in other news, you remember a couple of years ago, Panera actually announced that they were opening up a string of stores called Panera Cares. It was a pay what you want type of restaurant. So you walk in, you order, then they say, you pay us what you think you should pay us. Some people paid nothing. Some people paid 3 times, 4 times, 5 times more than what they were supposed to pay. Well, sad news. Sad news. It is coming to an end. There was one left in Boston. It is going to be closing on February 15th. So,
a failed experiment.
Yeah. They started this in 2010, so it's been going on for almost a decade now.
February 15th, Panera Cares could close, and our government could close.
That's right.
Key date.
Yeah, it's going to be very, very big day. And there is a new index by 24/7 Wall Street to figure out what are the worst cities to live in America. And I just want to point out that they did have a set of criteria here, how they figured this out. They said who has high crime rates, widespread poverty, weak job markets, and they took a look at what you have in terms of options for entertainment and cultural attractions.
All right, so give us some names.
The worst city in America. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Do you have any guesses, by the way?
Oh, maybe like Tampa or something.
I'll say this. This is not... Tampa's a great guess, by the way. That's my pick. Mendota, California. California. The poverty rate is 49.5%.
Wow.
They have a very high violent crime rate, and it's just very, very bad there. Number 2 is Florida City, Florida. Number 3 is California City, California. Number 4 is Macau, Hawaii. You don't think of Hawaii as being a terrible city.
You do not think of Hawaii.
Number
about to get worse with this new tax.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
It's going to go back up to 1.
Yeah.
This is the Bill Press Show.
The Bill Press Show on this Friday, February 8th, 2019. I'm Igor Volsky, sitting in for Bill Press as we get ready to dive into the latest on the Mueller investigation. I am joined by my former colleague, Max Bergmann. He's a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. On Twitter, at Max Bergmann. That's 2 N's. And online at AmericanProgress.org. Max, it's so good to see you.
Good to see you.
So, lots to unravel. I feel like last night and yesterday afternoon, all of the different pieces of the story, all different stories collided together from the from now we know about investigations that are going on into the inaugural committee of Donald Trump that came out of tapes seized from Michael Cohen. That's still unfolding. You have Matthew Whitaker, who's going to be testifying this morning before the House Judiciary Committee. All of the jockeying that was going on leading up to that hearing. Can't wait. And of course, the House Intel Committee announcing that they're going to be opening back up, I should say, their investigation into foreign connections between this administration and Trump and Russia and a whole host of other pieces. Where do we begin? Maybe let's start with Chairman Schiff, Adam Schiff. Forgot his first name for a second there. Adam Schiff. The day after the president's State of the Union, announcing, despite the president's plea to Congress, don't investigate me. Yeah. That's not what he sounds like, but, you know. Peter does a much better job.
No, I don't. Not of Adam Schiff. No, but that was not bad.
I was doing Trump. Don't investigate me.
I don't do Trump.
You don't do Trump?
But that wasn't bad.
Your Clinton is good, though. I'll give you that, as we've heard. So... but the day after, Adam Schiff saying we're opening this investigation back up. Max, why is this significant, and how much larger is the scope of this renewed investigation than from what we saw when Republicans had the majority on the committee and closed it, saying no connections, no collusion, there's nothing?
Right. Oh, I think it's very significant. You know, it's basically a year ago that the Republicans said, okay, we're done. We've done our investigation, and the Republican report with Nunes and the House Intel Committee with member Devin Nunes exonerated Trump, said they found no collusion.
I like how all he gets is member. There's no former chairman. There's member.
No, he's ranking member.
I like it.
And I think with Adam, I think this has actually been a very significant week in the showdown with the administration over oversight. You know, the January was consumed with the showdown over the shutdown of the government. And now we're sort of shifted in some ways to oversight. It's both the showdown with Whitaker and House Judiciary and Schiff immediately after the State of the Union. And I think what this is indicating is, no, we're going. We are, the House Democrats are going to investigate and do proper oversight. And what happened during the previous 2 years, I think it's important to sort of, 2 years ago, the House Intel Committee created this investigation. They said, okay, Republicans relented, said we'll create an investigation into whether there was Russia collusion between the Trump campaign and Russian interference. And then they, basically spent those past 2 years, the Republicans working very hard to protect Trump, to undermine an actual credible investigation into what happened. And so in some ways, House Republicans are very complicit in all that's gone on in the last 2 years. And House Democrats have tried to conduct a thorough investigation. They've cross-examined a lot of these witnesses, had a lot of these witnesses lie to their faces, or at least they believe that a lot of perjury occurred. And so now, there are documents that they want to subpoena that House Republicans prevented them from seizing. And there are witnesses they want to call back. That had contradictory statements.
They've also found out some of the witnesses lied to them.
Yes. And so I think what we're seeing now
Which, by the way, you do when you're innocent.
Yes.
You mislead, you commit perjury. when you have nothing to hide.
Well, you're very, very innocent.
Yeah, very innocent.
That's how innocent people behave, in case you're wondering.
The classic Devin Nunes, own goal, I think we're about to see, where a lot of people testifying in front of the House Intel Committee thought that this was a free pass to commit perjury because nothing was going to happen to them because they were protected by Devin Nunes and House Republicans. That doesn't really work. You lie to Congress.
Yeah.
It doesn't. There's not really maybe there is a time limit, but at least we're in the statute of limit. We're not outside the statute of limitations. And so I think what we're going to see now is picking up the investigation where Democrats had sort of left off. They've been tracking this very closely for the past 2 years, and there's a lot more to investigate. But I think it's going to be sort of very hard charging in the weeks and months ahead. And so then when we get to Matthew Whitaker, and the kind of back and forth over will he not testify?
Now, this we should note that Jerry Nadler, who's the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, sent a letter to Whitaker. Was it a month ago? A little bit ago, saying, "Here are the kinds of questions I want to ask you.
Yeah,
I want you to take this letter to the president and ask him if he's going to flex executive privilege on any of these issues." And if he does not, I expect, Matthew Whitaker, when you come before my committee, you answer these questions, because what we had seen with previous administration officials and former Attorney General Jeff Sessions is that they would avoid answering key questions by claiming that the president could, at some point in the future, declare executive privilege and thus get out of answering the question. What kinds of questions does the chairman want to ask Whitaker that he's afraid that Whitaker would, weasel his way out of? What does he want to know?
I think a lot of the questions will revolve around the special counsel and how he has overseen that. And some of the questions I think may refer to, did he provide any advanced warning of potential of indictments or other developments in the special counsel case to the White House? There are some clear indications that the White House had some heads up that certain things were happening. And what was the role of Whitaker? When we think about that BuzzFeed story that came out a few weeks ago, the BuzzFeed story alleged that Michael Cohen, when he lied to Congress, that lie was effectively directed by the White House and by Trump himself, and that the story said that they had the Mueller investigation had tangible evidence of that. Well, something happened in which the Department of Justice and the White House decided to exert pressure on the Mueller investigation to issue that public denial. So what was Whitaker?
Oh, you think the White House pressure?
Well, that's been reported. That the White House, probably knew that Mueller didn't actually have physical evidence of that there was maybe something slightly off in the BuzzFeed story, and then exerted pressure on the Department of Justice, who then exerted pressure on Mueller to release this statement.
And thus we have the statement. Okay.
And so, I think that's one sort of theory of how the events unfolded. There's been some reporting to back it up, but here now we have Whitaker, under oath. What happened? Did you exert any pressure? So I think it'll be those sorts of questions. I think also questions about, have you prevented Mueller from taking any action? What have you been briefed regularly? And I think what is pretty clear is that the Department of Justice and the White House and Matthew Whitaker himself are terrified. They, when he had his public press conference, and it was a total sweat fest. It looked like that GIF out of Airplane where, he's flying the plane and sweat's just like water's just like pouring out of his face.
By the way, I saw that and I thought it was photoshopped.
Yeah.
Who sweats this much?
And I was like, what is happening? What is this guy waiting for results? I mean, it's terrible.
Yes.
And I thought, honest to God, for days, I thought it was photoshopped until I saw the video and I go, oh no.
I hope he brought like a roll of paper towels with him to the hearing that he can just,
I mean, to be fair, in D.C. in the summer, that's like not all that unusual when people are walking outside and then you come inside. But
I've sweated before. I'll admit,
but it's January and it's really cold outside, and so I think that just demonstrated he is quite nervous under any sort of public scrutiny. And even his comments in that press conference about how the Mueller investigation, I think, is wrapping up soon, I think would also be a line of questioning. And I just think that he's not prepared to really go under scrutiny to answer a lot of questions that are going to come to him, and just wants to be able to have this sort of get out of a tough question free card of executive privilege. And I think one of the things that Nadler has been very smart about is that, this is going to set the precedent for how the administration handles oversight questions going forward. So you back down now, then what that enables is, there's a subpoena from Congress. We're just going to ignore it. Congress is requesting this document in the future, whether it's about the EPA, whether it's Energy Department, Housing and Urban Development. No, we're just going to ignore it. And I think it's very important in these sort of opening salvos with Schiff, with Nadler.
Really set the stage.
Set the stage that there is a real concern that, this is in some ways a very corrupt administration, and it wouldn't be shocking that this administration breaks a lot of laws in not complying with congressional oversight and really stonewalls and efforts by Congress to get to the bottom of certain investigative leads. And so they need to set the precedent now, and I think that's what they've done this week.
And the committee gave Nadler the authority to be able to subpoena Whitaker at the actual hearing.
Yes.
If Whitaker refuses to answer the question, which is extraordinary, the Justice Department yesterday sent a letter to the chairman saying that they demand a commitment from him to not use that authority during the testimony. It appears they've come to some kind of agreement now where Nadler said, hey, listen, Whitaker, if you are willing to answer these questions, right, and have this conversation, I will not need to use this authority. But that's not I won't use this authority. And of course, then what happens is if he's subpoenaed, there's probably going to be some kind of legal fight of, can Nadler go before a judge and convince that judge to hold Whitaker in contempt? And the letter, that early letter that he sent, is really going to be instrumental in Nadler's case in showing to the judge, hey, look, I gave them a heads up. They had an opportunity to respond. They did not. Whitaker should be held in contempt if he doesn't answer.
Yeah, I sort of agree with Mitch McConnell's comments from a while back when you talk about process you're losing. Yeah, and I think that when I look at the Justice Department, sort of say, you don't do, trying to sort of,
because usually they say this takes longer, right? They need more time.
And I think Nadler's position, at least just from a public perspective, is no, just like we're asking you reasonable questions. We expect you to respond to them. And what was happening over the previous 2 years was, you're exactly right in your lead-in, that they were just exerting executive privilege all over the place. And this was true not just in public hearings, but also in the House Intel Committee when there would be questions asked. And that frankly doesn't fly. That shouldn't fly. And Republicans allowed it to. And I think one of the things is that we've seen with this past election is American people want answers. And so if the administration is seen as stonewalling, okay, and then there'll be a legal fight, they'll go to a judge, but it also will be a political fight about Democrats asking legitimate questions and the administration refusing to answer and then going to court to try to be silent. I think it's pretty obvious where the public is going to side and who's going to look worse in that situation. Yeah. It's going to be the administration that is trying to conceal information from the public.
And again, this is not how innocent people behave.
No.
If you have nothing to hide, you answer questions.
Yes.
Let me ask you about Michael Cohen, because I'm trying to figure out what is going on with him. So the man is about to go to prison.
Yeah.
He has, a month until he starts his 3-year sentence. He was supposed to testify, was it next week or something? That got
this week.
This week. Yeah. That got pushed back to February 28th. So there's really days left until he has to go away. There are other committees that are jockeying to get him to testify as well. So clearly he has some kind of information. The reason for the delay that they gave us is that there have to be some other kinds of developments in Mueller's work. So something else has to happen before he testifies. Do you have any sense of what that is, of what's going on? You also had a judge in the last couple of days, maybe it was yesterday, not redacting certain parts of I'm not sure.
It was Manafort's cooperation agreement when he lied. And this was before the judge ruling to sort of break the cooperation agreement.
Yeah.
And I've been reading through it this morning. It's fascinating reading.
So what is going on with Michael Cohen is my question.
Okay. So I think we have.
And will you visit him in prison?
Yeah. So I think Michael Cohen, we need to put in sort of two buckets. There's Mueller investigation and there's Southern District of New York. And the Mueller investigation is very targeted on the Russia collusion, and their mandate was whether the Trump campaign coordinated with the Russian government. That is what they're investigating. But when Michael Cohen was arrested, they raided the Southern District of New York, and FBI agents raided his office, his hotel, his apartment, and this was on April 9th of 2018. One thing I sort of picked up in reading something over the last few weeks was that on April 5th, so just a few days before, so April 9th was a Monday, on the previous Thursday, Michael Cohen was actually on a yacht off Miami Beach with this donor to the Trump inaugural committee that gave $1 million to the Trump inauguration because he was effectively trying to get a $5 billion loan from the Department of Energy. And on this yacht, so was this donor and the Qatari Sovereign Wealth Fund, the representatives. So Michael Cohen, I think, was clearly involved in multiple pay-to-play schemes that are allegedly. And, that a lot of that was reported at the time. And so one of the questions is, these charges haven't really been brought about potential bribery and official corruption. And one question I have is, did all that money that was going to Michael Cohen for his influence peddling just go to Michael Cohen, or did that go to someone else, perhaps someone that lives in 1600
Individual one,
and so I think when we think about the article of the Constitution and the impeachment clause of the Constitution,
as you do frequently,
there's three things it says. It says first thing is treason. And, treason, you need to be an act of war, according to lawyers, for that to be used. Then there's high crimes and misdemeanors, which doesn't really have any real legal meaning. And the third is very specific, and it's bribery. And so one of the questions is, is Michael Cohen, is the Southern District of New York with the subpoenaing of the inauguration committee.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a second.
Are we going down sort of a line of official bribery and corruption? And one of the things that just to pivot quickly to the Manafort cooperation agreement, I know this gets complicated. What's been very interesting in reading through this is that it basically confirms what we were thinking, right? That this is about the Russian collusion. Mueller is about the Russian government's effort to interfere with the campaign. He's looking at the meetings and contacts that Manafort was having with his right-hand man, who was a Russian intelligence officer, and he had multiple meetings during the election, then after the election, during the inauguration. And so these meetings kept on, and so things are redacted, so you have to kind of piece certain things together.
Sometimes not well,
but sometimes not well. But it mentions that Manafort, one of the complicating factors in this was that Manafort may be trying to get a pardon, and it says that explicitly. And what does that tell us? It tells us that it is what we think it is. That when going after Manafort, why would the special counsel's office be worried that Manafort might get a pardon? Why would Trump pardon Manafort? Because Manafort is going to provide evidence that implicates the president of the United States. That's the only reason for Trump to pardon Manafort. And so I think, it just sort of further confirms where this is headed, where this is going. This is going, towards the president. We're down to not very many senior people left for this to really target.
So in terms of the investigation into the inaugural committee, now, Mueller, I don't have them, has tapes of conversations that Michael Cohen recorded for some reason between him and I don't know her name, but this is the woman who was helping organize the inaugural committee, who's very good friends with Melania Trump, and she organized 18 of the parties and really helped head it up. she, in conversations with Michael Cohen, complained to Michael Cohen about all of the shady things that were happening surrounding the inauguration, surrounding the Trump organization. And there's a real sense that the Trumps and the children were very involved in all of this stuff, that they were using the inauguration, this is going to shock you, Max, to personally profit. What do we know about how that's unfolding?
So, I mean, I think it's been unfolding for a while too. So that
Many folds to
yes,
this.
the deputy chair of the inaugural committee was none other than Rick Gates, who is now
that's right.
who's been cooperating for more than a year, and there's all this foreign money pouring in to the inaugural committee, oftentimes through cutouts. And Mueller has even brought charges against someone for acting as sort of a cutout, a go-between, to basically take this foreign money to say, okay, I'll pretend it's from me, and then pass it on to the inauguration. All of this just looks like straight pay-to-play corruption. And it's a little bit like once Trump and his team won the election, it was the fox in the hen house that, so people who their entire business life has been about sort of these sort of grifting ideas, trying to just make money here and there, didn't change. They got in, they suddenly said, oh, we can monetize this. We can take advantage of this. There's just a problem for them, which is called the law, which is called,
it's called the law.
It's called, you're going to be a government official. You can't do that. It's called corruption. And so, that to me,
it's called presidential harassment.
And so I think one of the things is that these, that they're not also that clever and that smart about masking any of this. I think there was an air of hubris also around at that time, a lack of understanding that, being president doesn't mean you're king, doesn't mean the rules don't apply to you, doesn't mean you can get away with everything. That in fact, we are a nation of laws, and hopefully no one is above the law. And so the sense of impunity, and also, hey, we're not in government yet, so maybe we can take this money now. So I think that is going to be a major focus of the Mueller investigation in the Southern District of New York, about what did these people, what did these foreign governments think they were getting when they were pouring money into this inauguration?
Where does the Mueller investigation stand? Because we've heard that it's about to finish. We're about to get some kind of report. Do we have any sense of what the progress is like?
So I think what's clear, we're in the fourth quarter.
Ooh.
Now, we don't really know is the 2-minute
analogy I understand.
Yeah, has the 2-minute warning happened, or is this the game about
now
to end?
A warning?
Or do we have a ways to go? I think the Cohen delaying his testimony is to the end of the month is somewhat suggestive that maybe there could be some movement in the next few weeks. Rod Rosenstein, there was reporting early in January that he was thinking about resigning, but it was going to wait until the Mueller investigation ended, and he was thinking about the end of February. I'm also going on vacation in about a week, and for a week, and so I think
or maybe not. We're about to find out if you're going or not.
I think I've circled that as like prime target where how could Mueller wreck my vacation? It's like, okay, so I think there's a lot of things sort of coming together, but I don't know. It's been very unclear. I think we are looking at between now and the summer at the very least, because I think this is going to be very damning of the president, in my view. I think it's almost certain. And because of that, Congress is going to need time to process this. And Mueller will also look at America's political process and say, hey, 2020 election season is about to start. And that if this is as damning as I think it is, and if we are going down that little, I word process, the impeachment process, then the Republican Party may need to have time to select a new potential nominee in the 2020 cycle. And, it's not to sort of prejudge this of where this is going, but I think all indications are that the President of the United States knowingly participated in this Russian conspiracy to interfere the election. And the idea that he didn't, that he wasn't aware, is just completely nonsensical, given that we know the simple fact that Donald Trump ran the Trump campaign. And we know this because literally everyone said it at the time, including Trump himself, every embedded political reporter. So I think that's where we're headed, and I think that's the writ of the Mueller investigation, to get to the bottom of Russia collusion. And he's making a lot of headway. A lot of people have been indicted. A lot of people are cooperating. And so, the walls, I think, are clearly closing in.
Max Bergmann, he's a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, on Twitter at Max Bergmann, NN, and AmericanProgress.org. Max, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back right after this.
Follow us on Twitter at BP Show. This is The Bill Press Show.
Hey, Hard, what's this?
That's my resignation letter.
You're resigning.
Why? Because you're constantly ignoring me. You're half as active as you used to be, and you eat stuff like this. You've been putting me under a lot of pressure lately. That's why I'm ready to quit.
I forgot. I'll do better. Please, don't quit on me.
Okay, but remember, it's not what you say, it's what you do.
Listen to your heart. Don't let it quit on you.
Let's go for a walk.
Uncontrolled high blood pressure could lead to a stroke, heart attack, or death. Get yours to a healthy range before it's too late.
Adventure can be found anywhere, but the best place to start is in the forest.
I spy something beginning with S.
Snow?
No.
Snow-covered trees.
Nothing to do with snow.
Head outside to discover incredible animals and beautiful plants that come together to create an unforgettable adventure.
Wow.
So grab your loved ones.
Don't even.
And explore a world of possibilities.
Come on, this way.
Visit discovertheforest.org to find the closest forest or park to you.
I grew up in the housing projects of Cleveland. I didn't even know that life could be any better than it was. Education for me has been a way to get away from the agony of what was normal life. I want to be able to impact the community, not just look back on where I came from, but to reach back to where I came from and pull some people up with me. My name is David, and I am your dividend.
Hamilton was adopted from a rescue in 2008. He really likes to be around people. And as soon as I start to make my breakfast, Hamilton is right there. I get out my mat and I'm doing a downward dog and he's underneath. He's quite the pug about town. He gets invited to a lot of parties. He knows he's a pretty big deal. I mean, look at this little face. How could you not love him?
Take The Bill Press Show anywhere you go. Download our free podcast, search for The Bill Press Show on iTunes, and catch the highlights from every show.
We are anywhere and everywhere you want to be. The Bill Press Show on this Friday, February 8th, 2019. I'm Igor Volsky, sitting in for Bill Press. You know, we started out the week talking about the State of the Union, but given all of the stuff that has happened since then, does anyone even remember that speech? Matt Gertz is the senior fellow at Media Matters for America, or a senior fellow. Maybe they refer to you as the senior fellow.
I'm the only one, as far as I know.
Oh, are you the only one?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, you know, as you know, I come from the world of CAP, where there are senior fellows
sure,
and senior. So, the senior fellow at Media Matters, Matt Gertz. You know him on Twitter, an excellent Twitter follow, at Matt Gertz. That's with a Z, Gertz. And, of course, MediaMatters.org. Matt, so good to see you. Welcome to the program.
So good to see you, too. Always happy to be here.
I was traveling yesterday, and in the airport, I bought a copy of the Wall Street Journal, and I was reading through and flipping through, and I turned the page, and I see a full-page ad from Fox News bragging about the fact that they're the most watched network for the State of the Union. They had their viewership numbers, and then MSNBC and CNN and NBC and CBS and ABC, and they were like, we put them to shame. And the graphics for that ad were basically the Fox News political team. So you had Chris Wallace, you had Brett Baier, you had Martha McCallum, you had, I forgot her name again, Dana Perino, and you had Laura Ingraham, who kind of stood out as the opinion person, but everyone else, I guess Perino too is an opinion person, everyone else, they were really showing us that they covered this speech like a real news organization with real tough analysis. You did us all the favor of actually watching Fox News after the speech, and as we were talking as you came in, you noted there was a real difference between that ad, how they portrayed their coverage, and what the Fox News coverage of the State of the Union actually looked like.
Yeah, it looked brief, I guess I would say. They're
real pithy, as Bill O'Reilly would say, right?
Indeed.
Keep it pithy, and they did.
So, the speech starts at 9, it ends at 10:30, and over the next half hour, you have about 15 minutes of actual political talk from that vaunted crew, split around the Stacey Abrams speech. Then they went to commercial, they came back, and it was time for Sean Hannity's show.
There was nothing he could do. He was scheduled, it's his show.
What can you do? So you just have to bring. You have to have Sean Hannity on to say it's basically the greatest speech of all time, and he brings out, Ted Cruz is there, Lindsey Graham, Eric Trump, Lara Trump, and they all agree that the speech was very, very good. So once you have that group of people all agreeing, the president's own son says, so it must be the case.
Let's talk about the tone of Fox News these days. There was a time where I used to watch a lot of cable news. I don't anymore, and I feel so much healthier. So I thank you, by the way, for taking on that role. Has the tone these days, has it changed at all? I mean, it feels like, to some degree, the walls are beginning to close in, particularly on the Russia stuff. I mean, there's, all kinds of congressional oversight happening now that wasn't happening before, that this administration is really struggling. And so in those 15 minutes, in what their slogan is, real opinion, real news, real honest opinion, right?
That's it, yes.
So in that real news portion, how is the tone of analysts like Chris Wallace or Brett Baier? Is there a degree of criticism in what they say?
I mean, it's the sort of thing where
Wallace has always been pretty sharp.
Yeah. It's basically, it's straight up political optics coverage. So, the president, he's reaching out here, he's not reaching out there. What does it mean? What's the strategy involved?
I see.
And
kind of like a horse racy, it's quite political.
Sure, it's quite surface level. There was nothing resembling a fact check, which I thought was kind of shocking.
Shocking.
I mean, we're at a point in this presidency where everyone basically knows that the president lies all of the time.
Yeah.
I think the Washington Post fact checker count is somewhere around 8,500 falsehoods and misleading statements. Daniel Dale,
seen numbers that high.
At Toronto Star, only looks at specific falsehoods, and he's at 4,500. So, the president lies a lot. It's incumbent on any news organization that actually cares about informing their audience to explain that. And Fox just doesn't. It's just not a thing. It was not part of their coverage in any meaningful way. And, how could it be with 15 minutes of time to talk about the president's speech and the Democratic response?
There's just not enough time for a fact check.
I guess they were counting on Hannity to do it.
Yeah.
I don't know. And that, he must have run out of time, too. He was planning on getting it in there somewhere, but
It is amazing to me that he had the entire Trump family on. I mean, it's practically the entire Trump family.
No. It was just Eric and Laura on his show, and then Don Jr. was on the next morning on Fox and Friends.
Yeah, let's not get crazy, Igor.
Can't have them all at once. You got they spread the Trumps around a little bit, you know. Oh God! And so at the end of the Donald Trump Jr. interview, Brian Kilmeade goes, he'll have like a big political career if he wants it.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's the next thing.
Oh, is that
if
so?
Don Jr. doesn't end up in jail?
Yeah, big.
He's got two career paths: jail or the presidency. Great, that's great. You know, that actually scares the hell out of me because you look at the speeches that both Eric and Donald Jr. gave at the Republican National Convention, and they both clearly want to get their hands on this political game that their father is in now.
Well, they want to get into the game of using elected office to enrich themselves. That's the game.
Yes,
obviously,
exactly. Yeah.
To just really state the obvious. Let's talk a bit about Jeff Bezos, because yesterday, I guess, you had a crazy development in that story. Now, the background here, and you're going to have to help me a little bit. I've been following this very closely. That Jeff Bezos and his longtime wife announced they were divorcing. This was several months ago now, or maybe
early January.
Early January.
It just feels like several months.
A real long time ago.
It was several years ago.
I'm just learning about it now. And the National Enquirer, after that announcement, published stories about the mistress that Jeff Bezos had. There were photos that I guess they didn't publish, but they were getting close to publishing. And yesterday, Jeff Bezos posts a very unusual post in which he accuses the publisher of the National Enquirer of basically blackmailing him and threatening to publish all of these text messages between him and his mistress and photos. And Jeff Bezos says, I'm not going to be susceptible to this. I'm speaking out publicly in, my goodness, what must have been a painful thing to write. What is happening?
Quite a lot. So part of the backstory here is that after the initial National Enquirer story came out, which was based on both photos that they obtained by, I guess, following Bezos and the woman that he was seeing, Lauren Sanchez, who's a TV host, around the country, but also through text messages between the two of
and
them.
that they think the Jeff Bezos's brother may
unclear.
have leaked.
So he's in.
Just
so
crazy.
So Bezos,
he's a Trump supporter.
Bezos doesn't invest. Is basically has unlimited resources because he's the richest man alive, and so decides to find out how did my texts end up in the hands of the National Enquirer. So he has his security team start doing an investigation into this. A couple of days ago, the head of that investigation told the Washington Post, which Jeff Bezos owns, and where my wife works, full disclosure.
Full disclosure.
That they believed that there was a political motive, a political actor in some way.
Yeah. Here, I want to read this really quickly because there was a Washington Post reporter who said that Bezos' investigator suspects that, quote, a government agency.
No, you're getting ahead of me. You're getting ahead of me.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'll get to that.
I'm sorry.
So at first, it's just that there's some sort of political involvement, which raises questions about Donald Trump, because as we know, Donald Trump, longtime friendship and sort of business association with David Pecker. My God.
Can we just say really quickly, shout out.
The writers are really
HuffPost yesterday with the headline of the day says, Bezos exposes Pecker.
Oh, boy.
Oh, goodness.
So Pecker played a key role during the 2016 election in doing catch and kill stuff around one of the stories involving Donald Trump and a mistress. Obviously, because there's always some sort of illegal Mueller-related angle. The AMI is now testifying, it now has like a cooperation agreement with the Southern
Pecker
District
himself
of New York,
has a
and Pecker does
cooperation
as well,
related
to that effort because it potentially involved illegal payments that like violated campaign finance law, and according to Michael Cohen, involved the president. So all of that is sort of, that's backstory. So the head of the investigation tells the Washington Post, we think there's a political actor, and that's when the emails start. That's when the National Enquirer goes to Jeff Bezos and says, we really would like you to not say that. We'd like you to end your investigation. And if you don't end your investigation and say that that is in fact not true, that there was some sort of political involvement, we have these pictures that you took of yourself and various other photos that are it would be a shame if they got out into the public eye. I, as an editor, take no pleasure in telling you this, which is one of the great lines, I think. So that's what really kicked it off. It's the investigation was getting too close to something, apparently. And so in retaliation and to keep that from getting any further, the threat about the photos came out. And so then comes the question, again, I mean, all along the question has been sort of, where did the texts come from? How did the National Enquirer get them? There's been some question about whether the brother, as you said, of Linda Sanchez was involved in some way.
Oh, it's Linda Sanchez, not of Jeff Bezos.
No, yeah, it's Linda Sanchez's brother, who is associated with Roger Stone and Carter Page and that whole world. And so there are questions about whether there was some involvement there. The other question is whether there's some sort of connection to a foreign government or a government agency, I think is how it was phrased on the news last night. There's a surprising amount of stuff in the Bezos blog post about Saudi Arabia.
Oh, really?
Which is an odd thing to include. The Saudis obviously had some sort of relationship with AMI and the National Enquirer. AMI put out a sort of glossy mag about how great MBS is a couple of years ago as part of his effort to brand himself as a great a
reformer, forward-thinking leader. Yeah.
So, I mean that.
And so, what does Bezos say about Saudi Arabia?
He just sort of mentions in passing a couple of times associations between Saudi Arabia and AMI.
Wow.
And there's just not a real reason for that to be in there unless he either wants us to think there's a reason to suspect there's a connection, or he actually thinks that there's some sort of connection. I mean, the two ways you get text messages like this are a direct leak, where like Linda Sanchez is doing it direct, or sorry, not Linda Sanchez. Sorry, I'm forgetting her name. Where the mistress is somehow providing the text directly.
Yep.
Yeah, the second way would be like someone got a hold of her phone somehow and just took them all and sent them on. Third way is there's a hack of some sort, right? And I mean, I think we've seen a good amount of stories recently that relate to sort of Middle Eastern hacking operations as part of wide-scale PR and media-related offensives. So maybe that's what's going on. It's hard to say at this point.
It's a little surprising to me that the richest man in the world, who, has all kinds of business interests and even outside of this personal matter, that he wouldn't have the most secure phone /apps /communication devices that money could possibly buy. Like military-grade security. It's shocking if it was in fact a hack and it gives me a real sense of if they could get into Jeff Bezos's phone, like watch out, people.
Yeah, it's kind of tricky. I guess the other thing that surprises me about this whole thing is because it seems quite plausible that AMI does this sort of blackmail extortion stuff all the time. Ronan Farrow, right after the Bezos story dropped, said, like, yeah, they tried to do basically the same thing to me when he was reporting on the company. Like, why do you write that all out in an email?
Yeah.
Like, you're going to put it on paper?
That's a Snapchat message.
The stuff?
Well, this is very consistent. This is very consistent with the way that the Trumps do stuff, right? You look at Donald Trump
why they're
Jr.
friends.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you look at what Donald Trump Jr. did when people were you talking about the Trump Tower meeting, and he said, "Oh no, this is what we talked about," and then just showed the emails of crimes.
Yeah, there's a great piece from Adam Serwer at The Atlantic about the Trump tendency to do this. It's I think it's called the Skinner Bell problem, the Trump Skinner Bell problem.
Stringer Bell from The Wire, yeah.
Right, because in The Wire, there's a scene in which Stringer Bell comes across one of his criminal compatriots taking notes on the notes of the meeting and makes a big deal about that because Robert's rules of order are not really what you want to follow in a criminal conspiracy.
Never put it in writing. Never put it in writing.
Do better at your crimes, people.
Yeah, I mean, come on.
Try harder. Really, an embarrassment. So the goal here, it appears, of whatever happened, and we'll get to the bottom of something eventually, is to humiliate Jeff Bezos.
Well, the goal here is to keep Jeff Bezos from going down the rabbit hole and finding out what AMI is up to, right? They want to shut him up and prevent the investigation from moving forward. And so the threats are a way to keep that from happening. And so Bezos seems to obviously not be willing to go through with that, since he just told us what they have very, very publicly, and basically said, he basically says, I have to do this because if they can do this to me, the richest man in the world, imagine what they can do to literally everybody else. So
I mean, this is what happens when you have FU money. This is what happens. Is this right here? You're like, I don't care. Here,
put the pics on the internet. I'll be fine.
I'll retweet them even. Do with it whatever you want. Wow. Well, we will really let's stay on top of this story, because it feels like, it feels like when you look, if I'm Trump or whoever's orchestrating this, pissing off the richest man in the world who has unlimited resources and isn't bound by all kinds of rules like you are as an elected official, to me seems like a bad idea.
Perhaps
seems
not
like
the greatest.
a really, really bad idea that's gonna come back to really haunt you. So FYI, for what that's a free public service announcement to the Trump family or whoever may be or may not be behind this. But Pecker, because he has that immunity deal, right, and the company AMI, they're both cooperating.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels like, we were talking about how they're friends with the Trump family. Maybe not anymore, if they're part of kind of helping uncover all this stuff.
Yeah, again, unclear. But so one interesting thing that happened was after the Bezos story came out, Trump actually tweeted about the original one about him and his mistress.
Mm-hmm.
He actually tweeted that Jeff Bezos had been exposed by a publication that is much more reputable than the one that he owns. So that's another interesting connection here. Is that back in 2017, Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski basically came out and said that they had been told by the White House that some bad stuff was going to be published in the National Enquirer about them if they didn't get Trump to stop it.
And it was about their love affair, right?
Yeah, and then he would later tweet that they had asked him to stop it, and he said no.
Wait, I'm sorry. So they asked Trump to.
I'm unclear enough about the details about whether they actually did it or whether they were told that they should.
I see.
And Trump lies all the time, so who
Who
knows what's going on at any real point. But the idea was that there was a way you could get the National Enquirer to stop publishing bad stories about you by going through Donald Trump.
Yeah. Okay.
Which now we're pulling together a lot of strands that seemed very separate, but maybe are more connected than we thought.
Yeah.
And it's going to take some time and investigation to really get a sense of what exactly is going on here, but it's probably not good. Generally speaking, most things are not good.
Most things are very bad. So the shutdown was not exactly a political win for this president. He's now in a situation where Republicans in Congress are telling him, don't declare national emergency. We're not going to go for another shutdown. We have to figure this spending thing out. And there's some kind of early maybe signs of cracks within the conservative base and support for Trump. I don't know if those numbers went down for him of support within the Republican Party. But certainly the political environment in February of 2019 is a little different than what it had been previously for him within his base. And I'm curious about, are we seeing in Fox News, in the larger conservative media world, any kind of moving away from the president, especially as, they get ready, or maybe they're not getting ready, who knows, for the publication of the Mueller report and whatever comes out there, is there any effort for the conservative movement as a whole to distance themselves from Trump, to preserve the conservative movement, right? So it doesn't crumble along with whatever happens to him. Are you seeing any distance?
Not really.
No.
You have the sort of core of the Never Trump movement, which remains sort of against him. But broadly speaking, the conservatives have largely gotten on board in ways that just make it very difficult for them to get off again.
Yeah, to unpeel themselves.
Right. You have the RNC basically rewriting the rules to make it really, really hard for anyone who's not Donald Trump to be the next nominee.
That's right.
Sort of forestalling any sort of real primary effort. And even if there was one, I mean, Trump's support in the Republican Party is still, 75, 80, 85%, depending on which poll you look at. He's broadly popular with his base. And it's always sort of unclear which way the direction is moving on this, whether it is that the base is happy, so the sort of conservative media megaphone is just giving them what they want, or if they're putting out all of this pro-Trump stuff, and in return the base is responding to that and is remaining connected to the president. But
they really feed each other in many ways.
Do.
Yeah.
It's an interesting situation where everyone seems to want to go down with the ship.
Yeah.
And
real short-term thinking there, it feels like.
I guess so. They seem to think it's going to work out. And, to some extent, it's not like Trump isn't achieving many terrible conservative goals and stacking the courts for a generation and so on and so forth. And they're pretty happy about that.
Right.
But, yeah, I mean, the last election was very, very bad for Republicans. The president seems, sort of wedded to saying that it was actually good, that, they took a couple of Senate seats, even though they should have.
North Dakota. Woo.
Yeah. I mean, I think anyone looking at the map in late 2016 would have said, God, 2018 is probably going to be really tough for Democrats. The Senate map was a total nightmare, and coming away with only losing 2 seats was pretty good.
Yeah.
And of course, taking back the House and being able to do the investigations and oversight that Republicans had shamefully ignored for the first 2 years of the Trump administration is an unalloyed good. But yeah, the president was basically wedded to saying, actually, everything's fine, and going forward with the government shutdown immediately after. And, the conservative movement has been happy to cheer that for the most part. You do see, as you mentioned, this sort of pushback from Republicans, senators in particular, around the idea of the National Emergency Declaration. Maybe it holds, maybe it doesn't. Fox really wants it, and that was key for the shutdown in the first place. So,
Policy by Fox. Matt Gertz, Senior Fellow at Media Matters for America at Matt Gertz. I'm Igor Volsky. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
This is the Bill Press Show.